Because Akane Shinjo has the power of a god, she manages to trap Yuta, Rika, and Utsumi in a super trippy dream world. Prepare to assemble for epicness, my friends. It's time for another awesome episode of Gridman, which might be one of the craziest episodes of the entire series, as it completely messes with the heads of all of the viewers who are going to watch it. If anybody has ever read or watched the Naruto series, some of this is going to seem very similar, because Akane Shinjo has the ability to trap our three main heroes in a dream world that she has created specifically for them, and things are supposed to be a lot more happier and hunky-dory in this world. This is exactly what happened in the Naruto series, where one of the main villains utilized a technique known as the Infinite Tsukiyomi to trap all of these people in this super idealized world that they would want to live in. The thing about Akane, however, is that she has complete dominion over everything, of every single character. And what I love about it is that it's a nice sort of callback to the very first episode of Gridman. In fact, the first half of this episode is almost shot for shot an exact replica of the very first episode, only with some minor changes and some characters switching out their roles, with Akane taking a more proactive part in all of these characters' stories, such as being the one who's actually there when Yuta wakes up and losing his memories. She's now actually the daughter of Rika's mother and is there to actually take Yuta to the hospital and back to his house. But we also get to see that she interacts with the other characters as well, being a very good friend with Rika, and basically just trying to be her best friend and getting her involved with all of the other characters in class. It's an idealized world for Rika, as she now gets to hang out with a ton of really awesome people. She even goes as far as to meeting Alexis Carib, who, you know, she just assumes is some sort of giant alien monster, but Akane just reassures her that he's a cosplayer. Although, if you saw something like that in real life, you'd have to question the realism of all of it anyway. And then, of course, there's Utsumi, who I felt was probably the most interesting of the three characters, as in the previous episodes we saw that he and Akane actually had a lot in common. Their love of movies, TV, kaiju, and superheroes, and they managed to have a lot of fun with that in this episode, seeing that they could have potentially ended up having a really great friendship, and maybe even could have fallen in love with one another. However, just like the Infinite Tsukiyomi in Naruto, a lot of these characters actually end up becoming aware of everything that's going on, knowing that they're not in a real world at all. They're actually under the control of someone, and that some things are too good to be true. Once they all realize this, they're able to return to the real world, however, they're completely incapacitated. And apparently the reason that this is all going down is because Akane has created this massive kaiju, which is able to trap them in this dream world, while also not being able to physically be in the real world. Some people can actually see it, and it can actually move around, but unlike the kaiju previously, it doesn't have the ability to actually destroy anything. That is until the characters actually manage to come back. But how are they going to be able to fight? They're completely knocked out. This led to what I think was maybe the most surprising scene of the entire episode, where all of the students of Neon Genesis Junior High managed to go into the city and transform into a giant robot version of all of their battle forms. I thought that they actually needed Gridman to pull this off. No, they go through a full-on transformation sequence that ends up making them look like a freaking Megazord combined with Optimus Prime. They end up fighting against this monster in a really stellar action scene where they throw its giant ass up in the air and cut it in half with a giant badass axe. It's a short-lived action scene, but I really love that we get to see that these characters can actually act independently of one another. It makes me realize maybe they should actually both go out separately and have just Gridman and the robot fighting next to each other. They would always have a 2-on-1 advantage against these monsters, and considering how destructive the Neon Genesis Junior High students are, I don't know why don't they utilize them a lot more that way. It's pretty freaking cool. While giant robots, monsters, and superheroes are awesome, the real star of this episode is Akane, and this episode sort of made me realize that in many ways, she's kind of like the real main character of the entire series. While Yuta is the one who combines with Gridman and is the default character of the show, there really isn't that much I could actually tell you about him, aside that he's a kid with amnesia and he's fighting against giant monsters and seems to have a weird, estranged relationship with Rika for some reason. But it's Akane who's definitely had the most development from the show, and yet her entire past and actual existence is still a complete and utter mystery. But she seems to be a severely damaged person who just wants to live in a perfect world that she has complete control of. But even when she actually has the ability to manipulate things and change things, she can't actually change someone's free will. Thus, it ends up biting her in the ass and transforming into a giant robot. It's heartbreaking, and it paints her as a more tragic villain for the show, although it's still very obvious that Alexis is basically the puppeteer who is pulling the strings, and he was utilizing Akane's damaged psyche to transform her into this, like, weird manipulating god. And I think that, combined with a lot of the amazing imagery from this episode, made this one of the more visceral experiences that I've had thus far with Gridman. But let's talk about that a little bit more in the rundown of this episode of Gridman, which might be, I think, my favorite episode of the entire series. And I know that might be kind of surprising for some, considering that I'm mostly an action junkie, and I think that some of the action in the previous episodes was done tremendously better. But this episode just really affected me in a strange way, especially how they tricked you into showing that this was sort of like a retelling of the very first episode. But throughout the entire freaking episode, what I loved about the imagery was the fact that Gridman was constantly trying to reach out to these three characters, appearing in the reflections of the building, and the water, and the sky, as if he's desperately trying to talk to them to bring them back to reality. Akane, however, I still think is the standout character of the series, where at first she seemed like kind of a stock villain. This episode made me see her in a completely different light, especially with her ability to manipulate things, and even though she can do this, she even recognizes that there's no way that she'll ever truly be happy. Even when she presents people with a perfect scenario of something that looks like it's going to be great, they actually end up rejecting it for something which might seem a little harsher and ultimately more realistic. But that's what it means to truly be a human. Not everything is going to be perfect. We're going to run into a lot of crazy things in our life. We're going to be affected by tragedy. It's all just part of the human experience, and Akane seems to have completely separated that from her actual personality. She almost doesn't seem human at this point, and even her herself says that she'd much rather live in a dream world. I don't know about you, but that's pretty freaking deep, and something that I think that we could all recognize. But if I did have like a favorite moment from this episode, it's actually a collective of two moments, and I kind of like how it's symbolic, how at the very beginning of the episode when this giant monster is materializing in the city, we get this shot of this guy who's walking across these train tracks, and the guardrails are finally starting to go down. Once they go down, the dream world officially kicks in and everything gets crazy. Eventually, when this giant monster is defeated, the very next shot we see is another shot of that with the giant Neon Genesis Junior High robot, and those guardrails are starting to lift, showing us we have officially returned to the real world. It's little moments like this that I think are really clever. That and of course just all the amazing imagery of Gridman appearing in multiple places in the episode. It was really satisfying. Watching Yuta, Utsumi, and Rika actually return to the real world, the way that they were animated while they were running was really stylistic and a little different from what we've actually seen from the series, and showing us that they're actually returning to the real world. It was super damn satisfying. And so was this entire episode of Gridman. I'm definitely going to give it some high marks for its storytelling, its amazing action, and for being surprisingly thought-provoking, considering that this is basically a Super Sentai anime series. So, I'm gonna give this episode a 5 out of 5. You guys need to check it out. If any of you did watch it, I'd love to get your thoughts about it. You can tell me all of them in the comment section below, and what you hope to see from the rest of Gridman. Thank you guys for watching this review. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down there, baby.